And so with that, we're going to move on to our first keynote address from Vic Vela. So let me stop sharing my screen. Here we go. All right. And I am thrilled to welcome Vic Vela to our chosen forum. Vic is a Colorado native and was the first member of his immediate family to attend college. He's been an award-winning professional journalist for more than 20 years since graduating from Metropolitan State University of Denver in 2000. Vic started his career as a sports anchor and reporter for an NBC affiliate in Texas. He also worked for newspapers, including as an investigative crime reporter for the Albuquerque Journal. He's covered government and politics in Colorado and was a 5-year member of the Colorado Capitol Press Corps. Nowadays, Vic is a news and podcast host and sports reporter for Colorado Public Radio. He's also an affiliate journalism professor at his alma mater. Vic is a 4-time Edward R. Murrow award-winning journalist and has won dozens of other journalism awards in the Rocky Mountain region. Vic is proudly open about the comebacks he's made in his life. For 15 years, Vic suffered from a crippling addiction to powder and crack cocaine. He's been in recovery since 2015. After testing positive for HIV in 2006, the virus has long been undetectable thanks to his rigorous adherence to antiretroviral therapy. Vic is the host of Back from Broken, a podcast about recovery and comeback stories from Colorado Public Radio. Thank you, Vic, so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you. It is totally a pleasure and a privilege to be here. Thank you for the warm introduction, and hello everyone who is joining us today. And thanks, guys, for sharing those important slides. My gosh, like I see those numbers of like things like overdoses and things like that, and they never are not astonishing. You know, they are just, and I'm going to get into some of that in some of my remarks today about the ongoing problem. Because remember, before the pandemic, addiction and mental health were the public health crises, right, going on even before the pandemic, and now it's been made worse. So thank you. And again, I want to thank everyone involved with Illuminate Colorado and Children's Hospital for putting this together and inviting me today. I also love that slogan, by the way, or the motto for Chosen, which is practice change starts with you. You know, I was watching Ted Lasso, and which is such a good show, and he gathered his team to talk about mental health issues. And the thing he said that really jumped out at me was, every choice is a chance. Every choice is a chance. And I just thought that was so profound, because, you know, that if you choose to talk about the things that cause you pain, if you choose to ask for help, there's a chance you're going to get better. And I truly believe in that philosophy. Plus, I'm just excited to be the first person in this forum's history to quote Ted Lasso. So that's also really fun. So on that note, what I'm going to do today is talk for a little bit, tell my story of how I got here, talk about the things that are often really hard to talk about, you know, but it's important to do that. I'm doing it for a reason, because I think we all have it in us to get better. And if I say something that helps anyone achieve that goal of getting better, what a blessing that is. And if my story helps any of you put a face to a major crisis, which is addiction, and it helps you better understand why people are suffering with addiction, why we do the things that we do, then my time is totally worth it, because I believe it's so important to humanize addiction, right? We just saw some of those statistics, and those statistics are important, but the people who are struggling with addiction, we're more than just statistics. We have names, right? We are your friends. We are your neighbors. We are your sons and daughters, husbands and wives. We are you. And that's why it's so important for me, I feel, to talk about this stuff. And I try and talk about it as much as I can. I hope a lot of you listen to Colorado Public Radio. If you do, thank you. I'm not going to ask you for money today, so don't worry. The pledge drive is over. But if you listen to Colorado Public Radio, you're used to hearing me introduce myself on the air this way. Good morning, you're listening to Colorado Public Radio News. I'm Vic Vela. But in other settings, I introduce myself this way. Hi, my name is Vic, and I'm a recovering drug addict. Look, I'm in recovery, and I've been sober for more than 6 years, and I'm very proud of that. But it took me a very long time to get here. You know, when things were really bad for me, I never contemplated suicide, but I also didn't care what happened to me. Like, I never thought about jumping off a bridge or anything like that. But if I was doing too many drugs one night and that just so happened to lead to an overdose and a death, well, then so be it. You know, that's how bad my addiction got. And for me personally, I had a 15-year love affair with cocaine. Most of that time using powder cocaine. And then when I couldn't snort cocaine anymore because I did so much damage to my nose, I started smoking crack on a daily basis. You know, and when that snake grabbed a hold of me and it just squeezed everything out of me, including my soul, I ruined relationships, jobs, finances, and health. I spent nights hiding from the cops. You know, every drug deal that went down, I always imagined the cops beating down my door. And then I imagined myself in prison, and then my life is over, right? Those things became real in my head. But the hell of it is that even though I would think about those things, consequences didn't matter to me. Nothing mattered more than getting high, right? That's why locking people up for their addictions doesn't do any good, because unless you're ready to get help, you're just going to get high the moment you get out anyway. You know, I overdosed. You saw some of those numbers about combining drugs like heroin and meth. For me, I did that with opioids and cocaine. I overdosed a couple of times by combining cocaine with morphine. I don't remember either overdose. I remember bits and pieces, like being in the back of an ambulance or waking up in a hospital, but I didn't remember how I got there. I just remember being really angry that I was still alive. I mean, that's how sad things were. And there were times I would lay in bed at night after being up for days, you know, high on cocaine, with my body and my mind were just like jello. But, you know, I was tired, but I couldn't sleep because the drugs were keeping me awake, right? Have you ever had that feeling where you're just so physically tired that you want to sleep? Your body just wants to sleep, but your mind and your heart just keep racing. You know, sometimes my heart was pounding so much, it just felt like it wanted to jump out of my chest. And at those nights, you know, after being up for like 3 days, I would pray to God and just say, you know, God, just take me, you know, just let me go to sleep and not wake up. So drugs are fun, huh? Look, I know this is really heavy stuff, but that's what addiction is. It's not a Disney movie. And I'm sure, you know, some of you out there know exactly what I'm talking about, how I used to support my habit, how I would lie to friends and manipulate and deceive family members into giving me money. I mean, these are people who love me, and I would take advantage of them. But that's what addiction does. It's a living hell, and I lived it for 15 years. But there's a reason I'm here and I'm able to talk to you guys about very painful things. It's because I got help. And because I learned how to talk about things that I didn't like talking about before. Because I learned in my own recovery that my drug use was a symptom of a larger mental health issue that I was dealing with. Pain from pain from childhood, pain from high school, and all through my life. And for 15 years, I medicated, self-medicated all of that pain with drugs and alcohol. You know, I sometimes think back at all the times I would come up with justifications to get high. Like, oh, I got into an argument with my partner, or I had a bad day at work, or I'm mad because the Broncos lost, right? Like, how many times did I drink or get high because of my problems? a lot, but getting high every day, getting drunk every day, committing crimes to pay for your habits, or getting in trouble with the law because we get drunk and we do something stupid, like that gets old after a while. It's exhausting, man. It's exhausting. But now I don't do that anymore. And that's the best thing about recovery, is that you don't have to live like this anymore. And I'm here to talk about mental health and addiction and how I got better, not perfect, but better. And before we get into the good stuff, about recovery, which I love talking about, it's really important to talk about the things that drove my addiction in the first place. Things that were going on well before I even started using drugs and alcohol. And for me, my mental health problems went all the way back to childhood. I grew up in Colorado. I'm a native, yay. And my family is such a beautiful family, large and loving Chicano family with roots in the Southwest going back centuries. And I grew up blessed to have parents who loved me unconditionally. And in many ways, I was just a normal boy. I grew up watching pro wrestling back in the 1980s, like Hulk Hogan and Rowdy Piper and Junkyard Dog and those guys. I'm kind of old, so I'm sure some of you guys don't know who those guys are. And I practically grew up at Mile High Stadium, the original Mile High Stadium. I was a huge Broncos fan. My dad would take me to games. So, I in many ways had a normal childhood, but there were other things going on outside of my control that really caused me a lot of pain inside. One thing, we were very poor, and when you're a kid, you can see that. You can see that your friends have nicer houses than you do, or that they're going on more vacations than you. Even though I live in Colorado, we never went skiing when I was a kid. We just couldn't afford that. That's just what rich people did, right? And my dad, while he's a really good man, and I love him to death, the truth is that he drank a lot. He was an alcoholic for sure. And when he drank, he was often really miserable to be around. And on top of all that, I'm gay. And I knew I was gay at a very young age. And I knew, I didn't know what gay was when I was a boy, but I knew that I liked other boys and that it was different. And listen, you got to remember back then in the 1980s and the early 90s, like being gay wasn't as widely accepted as it is today. So, I had to keep that to myself. All those feelings I had, I couldn't talk about that with anyone. And I'm dealing with all of these identity issues and feeling really insecure about who I was. And even though I had a lot of friends, I had no one to talk to about a lot of these things, especially about being gay, about being poor, things like that. So what do I do instead of talking about these things, instead of getting help? I acted out a lot. I had terrible behavioral issues when I was a kid, especially when I got to middle school and through high school. Like I was a terror in the classroom. Like I constantly interrupted teachers by being the class clown, the kid sitting in the back of the room, throwing paper airplanes, telling jokes. Yep, that was me. But that was me at my best. At my worst, I had a really dark side. And I often blew up at teachers and principals. I told them to F off in the middle of a classroom. I did not like authority figures. I didn't like people telling me what to do, teachers, police officers, bosses. I didn't like authority. I would kick chairs and storm out of the classroom and call teachers every name in the book. In fact, that's how my high school years ended. During my senior year, I got into a shouting match in the principal's office. And I was kicking chairs and nearly broke windows. They almost called the cops. And it ended up that they suspended me for the rest of my senior year. I was barely able to graduate. And even though I was failing some of my classes, I think the teachers gave me a D just so I wouldn't have to come back next year. They wanted me gone, man. They wanted me gone. And that's what I dealt with. And the only way I knew how to manage all of those painful things was through drugs and alcohol. And so now we're getting to why we drink and use drugs in the first place. Because man, when I drank and smoked weed for the first time, I guess that was maybe like 15. Wow, where has this been my entire life? And, and I'm like, life is hard, but now I have this new thing that makes it better. I can just drink this alcohol or smoke this joint and it's okay. And then my drug use really took off. I was a big Deadhead and a Fish fan, and I started taking LSD and mushrooms, and it was a blast, right? Because I have some breaking news. Drugs can be fun, okay? And that's the truth. Like otherwise we wouldn't call it getting high. I could talk about a lot of times when I had fun doing drugs, but when drugs start causing problems, that's when they stop being fun. And when drugs are the reason you end up in handcuffs in front of a judge, that's when it stops being fun. And the worst is when you're taking drugs every day, like I did, just to get through the day. When you're so scared of the crash. Oh, the crash is awful when the drugs run out, because the drugs always run out. It's that vicious cycle of getting high and staying high. That's where I was for a very long time. And when you do drugs every day, you do stupid things. And so when I was 18, I was arrested outside an Albertsons after getting into a physical altercation with a rent-a-cop. And the cops found a bunch of weed in my car, and I spent the night in jail. This was my first run-in with the police, and here I was barely starting my adulthood. I was busted for stealing CDs at Tower Records, and yes, I'm old enough to remember CDs at Tower Records, or in my case, stealing them because I needed money for drugs, right? This is not uncommon when it comes to addiction. So there are consequences. But I think like a lot of people who struggle with addiction, somehow I managed to take care of myself just long enough to get my career going. Because every addict will tell you that they remember a time when drugs weren't causing a lot of problems, when you could do drugs and still manage to lead a productive life, right? In 2000, the year 2000, I graduated from MSU Denver, and I was hired as a sports anchor for an NBC station in Texas. I was reporting on football and the Dallas Cowboys and Friday Night Lights. I'm only 23 years old, and my face was on billboards and stuff. I had a lot more hair back then, by the way. And through the years, I established myself as a good journalist, working in television and for various newspapers. And I guess I was sort of the poster child of the classic functioning addict, right? You've heard that before. Because it's hard to tell a guy that they have a problem when you're interviewing famous baseball players and celebrities and governors and senators, right? I can't have a problem. I just interviewed the governor. But the reality is my drug use really was getting out of control. Cocaine started out as a weekend party thing, then it became an everyday thing. And pretty soon I'm getting high right before I go on the air. And so I go into the bathroom, put on my tie and makeup, and then do lines of cocaine off the sink. And then go on the air and talk about sports. I did it every night. It was insane. But cocaine catches up to you pretty quick. And it catches up to your wallet pretty quick. It's not cheap, especially when you're doing it every day. So pretty soon I'm not paying the bills I'm supposed to be paying. I'm not paying credit cards on time. My financial health is now suffering. And when you do drugs every day, it affects who you are as a person. I would become irritable, argumentative, just really difficult to be around. Because when you're consumed by a cocaine habit, you think that you're the center of the universe, right? And then you start treating people poorly. And that's what happened with me. And getting into arguments with people at work, showing up to work on no sleep. And because of those things, I was fired from my second job in journalism. So, my first job in Texas, I was laid off through a company-wide layoff that was going on. And then I took a job as a morning show host here in Colorado, and I lost that job because of the things I just talked about. No sleep for 3 days and being irritable and not doing my job well. So then I started using drugs more dangerously, and I started smoking meth and shooting meth, sharing needles. And I would even try to sell cocaine to support my habit. Here I used to be on television. Now I'm selling baggies of cocaine at little neighborhood bars. Like, it was just totally normal. And I even got beat up by a drug dealer who I owed hundreds of dollars to. I'd been avoiding his calls for weeks. And when I finally came up with the money to pay him and I went to his apartment, he shut the door behind me, and then I just felt a fist against the back of my head. And he just kicked my butt as soon as I walked in the door. Like, I'm laying on the floor, bruised and bloodied. He stood over me and he's cursing, saying, never make me hunt you down for my money and things like that. And then after he gets done beating me up, he stands over top of me and points a gun at my face. And it felt like that gun was being held for like an hour, right? But it was really just like 10 seconds. But it was the longest 10 seconds of my life. I mean, he didn't shoot me, thank God. In fact, I think he kind of felt bad for being so rough with me. But you know what I did after I gave him the money and he settled down? I asked him for more drugs. Here I just got beat up physically. I had a gun pointed at my face. Now I got to go to the emergency room to get patched up. I just gave him hundreds of dollars to pay him back, money I didn't even have to begin with. And instead of leaving and never doing any of this again, I asked for more drugs and I got them. That's the insanity of addiction. And I lived like that for a very long time. And I suffered a lot of other consequences because of my drug use, consequences involving my health. In 2006, I was really sick all the time. I had no energy. It felt like I had the flu in the middle of summer. I was getting bizarre skin rashes, and doctors were totally perplexed until one day a doctor who knew my history with drugs asked me, "When was the last time you got tested for HIV?" And sure enough, the blood work came back positive. And not only did I have HIV, I was in really bad shape. My T cells were really low, and my viral load was through the roof. I had borderline AIDS. And the doctor said if I waited even just one more month, I probably would have had full-blown AIDS. I don't know how I got it. It could have been from sharing needles, things like that. But either way, drugs were the cause, so to speak. Because if I don't do the drugs, I don't engage in that kind of reckless behavior, right? So yeah, drugs aren't so fun anymore. But here's the thing, not even that news stopped me. In fact, my drug use accelerated. I just wasn't ready to stop. So for a long 15 years, I just kept getting high. And I went to great lengths to support my addiction. I was a member of the Colorado Capitol Press Corps for about 5 years. And the first few years, I was high every day, covering lawmakers at the Capitol. I hid this little crack pipe behind a dumpster across the street from the Capitol, and I would walk outside every so often to take a hit, get high, and then hide the pipe in a plastic baggie and then go back inside. And just imagine what it looked like for a guy in a suit and tie, crouching behind a dumpster, smoking crack, and doing that like every 30 minutes, and then going back inside the Capitol to, I don't know, interview the governor. That was my life. Until one day I just had enough. People ask me what my rock bottom was, and I always say, frankly, it was exhaustion. Being sick and tired of being sick and tired. I quit because I was exhausted being two different people all the time. It was exhausting, constantly running out of money because all my money went to the dope man, begging, borrowing, sometimes stealing to support my habit. It was just exhausting. So one night I was sitting on my bedroom floor with my dog laying next to me. I had just smoked my last crack rock and I didn't have any more money to buy any more. And I had been up for 3 straight days. I just couldn't imagine going through all of this again the next day. And I was listening to sad music on my phone and tears were streaming down my face. And I was scrolling through some phone numbers and I came across a friend who I met when I made a previous attempt to get high, or excuse me, to get sober. I think I got sober for like 2 weeks or something like that, but I still have the guy's number. He was also in recovery from crack cocaine addiction. I figured I didn't have anything to lose, so I called him. And mind you, it had been a while since we talked. It was like 2 a.m. Who knows if he was even going to answer his phone, if he even had my number. When I called him, he answered and he said, "Hey, Vic, how's it going?" And I just started crying. And I said, "Please take me to a meeting tomorrow." And he did. And that was January 25th of 2015. And I've been sober ever since. You know, looking back at those first few weeks of recovery, they were hard. I was really tired. My body felt like licorice. It just felt like I was physically weak and my brain was a mess because I had been feeding it cocaine for 15 years. And that's what happens. It throws your brain out of whack, right? Because cocaine totally upends your brain's reward system. And there's a huge disconnect when the brain's dopamine system is all out of order because of all the cocaine I was giving it. So I was tired, I was depressed, and that was hard to deal with. And I think that's why a lot of people relapse so quickly when they quit cocaine, because it's such a psychologically addictive drug. But I toughed it out, and I'm very proud of that. I started replacing old habits with new rituals. So instead of going to the bar at 10 a.m. like I always did, I just went to a meeting. I forced my body into doing stretches and exercises. And most importantly, I found a community of friends in recovery, people who enjoyed doing the same things I did, like playing basketball or going to see live music. And most importantly, I learned how to talk about my problems openly and honestly. That's the key. For the first time ever. You know, I would tell my sponsor and other close friends when I was having a bad day. I was honest about things like being scared of dating or losing my temper. And, you know, and all of a sudden, those things that used to scare me when I was growing up, you remember I was talking about being a kid and dealing with all this stuff, they weren't so scary anymore because I started talking about it. Look, there's no silver bullet for mental health and addiction issues. You just got to work at it. But talking about your problems must absolutely be part of the solution, because I don't have the luxury of drugs and alcohol anymore. That self-medication that I used to do. I've lost my privilege to get high. So if I'm having a bad day and I see a beer commercial, and those commercials always make drinking look really good, right? There's beautiful people on a nice beach. Everyone's having a good time, and you start thinking, yeah, beer on a beach sounds good, until I play the tape all the way through to the end. And because that beer commercial for me will always end up with me smoking crack behind a dumpster for 3 days. And they don't put that part in the commercial. So that's my truth. And so I've had to learn how to deal with life on life's terms. And that's okay, because while it's hard at first, it really does get easier. It's not only okay to ask for help, it's courageous to ask for help. You know, I'm the guy you listen to on the radio for news, weather, and information. And I'm here to say, it's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay if you can't do this alone, because I couldn't do it alone. I needed help. And when you finally are ready to get help and you commit to it and you take responsibility for your own actions, your life can change in ways you can't even imagine right now. You know, I used to sleep on park benches because I couldn't remember how to get home. I was taken to hospitals and overdosed, but now I work for an NPR station and I tell my story at health conferences and treatment centers and drug courts. And trust me, if you would have asked me 10 years ago if I'd be doing this stuff, if you would have told me this, I would have asked for whatever it was you were smoking. And again, I'm not perfect because guess what? Sober people have problems too. Okay, I still struggle with some behavioral issues. I struggle with everyday things in life. But my sober problems are nothing compared to my drug problems. Okay, like getting beat up by a drug dealer because you owe him money that you don't have is a problem. Getting pulled over by the police when you have 8 balls of cocaine in your glove box, that's a problem. Being delayed slightly in traffic is not a problem. So it helps me keep perspective. And while I'm not perfect, I wouldn't trade my current life for my old one in a second, no way. Like I do so much more with my life sober than I ever did when I was getting high, including hosting a podcast about recovery and talking to people about their recovery journeys in hopes that it can be a guide for someone else's recovery journey. I'm just here to say, listen, don't give up on yourself. Imagine the impossible, but it's not as impossible as you might think. I know quitting drugs and drinking and staying out of trouble, it can be hard. I ain't gonna lie, but living the way you are when you're using, that's hard. To constantly worry our parents, to constantly make our girlfriends or boyfriends worry, make our kids worry. I mean, how would you like it to not make those people worry about you anymore? I always tell that to people who are struggling. How would you like it if those people in your life didn't have to worry anymore? It's an amazing feeling. It's a tremendous feeling. And I'm telling you, it's possible. So believe in yourself. Imagine the impossible, one day at a time. Or as the Buddha said, each day we are born again. So I just want to say thank you for letting me share. Thank you for giving me your time today. And I appreciate you all. Thanks.